Yeah.
Hi, Mike. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you now. Yeah, I think you are muted for a moment. Good afternoon,
Okay.
everyone.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, how's it going?
I think you're muted again. Good now.
Did you hear from anybody that we're not,
Um,
we didn't receive yet? Is anyone else coming that said they were coming?
Maybe mentioned shoot,
Millie, yeah, okay.
but she also mentioned might be a little late.
Oh, okay, all right, so to start without her, okay. All right, good, so
Start the report.
we'll want to start recording and we'll. Okay, welcome everyone to the Roanoke County Planning Board. March 6th, 2025, and today we have, just a reminder, we are recording and I believe we're also on YouTube or one of the streaming services. So that is up and running. We've got one vote today for the minutes and presentations, and then we'll just set a public hearing. So let me go through roll call. Bill Santos, Mike Wiedemer.
Here?
Mike Sam Trapani,
Here.
Andrew Hollister,
Present.
Orlando Rivera, Dave Watson,
Here.
Millie Safranik, Legislator Colby, Legislator Barnhart,
Here.
Jeff McCann, Adrian Green, Amy Grower, Connor McMahon,
Here.
Robert Franklin,
Here.
Joe Taddeo, Richard Tantalo.
He's walking in.
Today.
Oh, he's still going? All right.
Oh, he's going Think he's coming? Okay. Christine Doherty. Sean Murphy.
Here.
And Andy Frazier. Okay, great. And Yushan, if you want to introduce any other staff or visitors, that'd be great. Thank you.
For the Department of Planning, our director, Anna Les is here, and also Pat Gooch will be presenting the CIP today. And Lisa Hampton, the assistant to the secretary to the board, and myself, Yishan Lin, planner with Monroe County Department of Planning Development.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming out. This great weather. We've had improved weather. First item on the agenda is the approval of the February 27th, 2025 meeting minutes. They were emailed to you and I need a motion for those, please. Thank you, Andrew. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, David. Any discussion with those? Any changes, revisions, comments? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, minutes are approved. Announcements and communications.
Before we start, just to make sure everyone had a copy of the proposed CIP for the 2026 and 2031. And for those that attend online or couldn't make it today's meeting, we will mail out a copy tomorrow.
Okay, and we're gonna, during the presentation, we'll have a digital showing up on the screen. Awesome, great. Any other reports from board members or staff? Great, moving on to the CIP presentation, introduction of the proposed 2026-2031 capital improvement program. Pat Gooch, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. Give it a moment to get it up on the screen. But for many of you, you are familiar with this process. For anyone new, I just want to reiterate that there's a lot of material to cover. I will cover it very quickly in the next less than an hour. But feel free to stop me and ask questions if anything catches your eye. And we can also have time at the end for questions and answers. And of course,
just as you're going through though, we should keep in mind. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, so Chairman Santos, thank you for reminding me. One of the main things that we want to keep in mind during today's presentation is not only what catches your eye that you want to ask questions today, but what you may want to have a department come in and speak to. So we have 2 more meetings scheduled for you to potentially have department representatives come in, tell you about specific projects, their overall projects. So as you're listening and hearing things, think about those things, jot some notes down, and then at the end, we will ask you who we should invite to those meetings, and then we will schedule accordingly.
So the final product, we owe the administration 2 things by April 1st. One is an approved CIP program. That's the whole 6-year package. But then there's a priority vote,
Correct, yes.
if you recall. So that'll be just next year's projects. So keep that in mind as you're going through as well. Start to prioritize them in your head. So when, in a week or 2, when that sheet is given to you, it's, you can fly through it. So.
Yep, and we will send an email out after this meeting with instructions on the priority vote. All of you should have access to that. If you don't, we'll make sure you can get that in the next week, or we can send you a paper copy so you can fill it out that way. But with that, I think did I miss anything else, Chairman?
No, I think you're good. Public hearing we'll have to set soon, but
Okay,
after your presentation, right? So,
correct.
yeah.
All right, so let's get started then. So as Ishan said, this is the 2026-2031 capital improvement program for Monroe County. Specifically, the 2026 year is the capital budget year, which will be that priority year you vote on. That is the year it will then be ideally rolled up into the 2026 budget. So how are we going to go through this? Tell you about the process, the CIP schedule. We'll talk about the presentation of the specific overall numbers and then department specific numbers. And then we'll leave some time to ask some questions and potentially have ideas of what departments you may want. And if those don't come before the end of today's meeting, we can also have some conversations and figure out who that is before next week. Whoops. One second, having a few technical difficulties, but I can just explain this because I know Mike's seen this slide before. So this is really just a slide showing the time frame. We start the process in September internally in the county, and we work through October, January, February, and March. We come to you, telling you where we are in the process, what we've done in terms of working with departments to figure out their numbers. Today is, of course, the March, incorrectly there, but today is March 6th. We have the 13th, we have the 20th, and if needed, the 27th. And then we will make sure that this body gets their recommended program to the county executive's office for April 1st, as required by charter. Then in May, county legislature will take up this work. And that process will move through the process and go from May, July to August with a typical process of referrals, committees, reviews, and the public hearing as well. And then in August, we will send out the final version, and then I will immediately start next year's process. So just a reminder about the charts and tables. So you'll see here, there's some different color indicators on there. So blue bars are the adopted CIP from last year, which is 2025-2030. Red bars are the preliminary department submissions. So that is what we are new to this year. Stripe bars are the 6-year program total, so everything aggregated at the end of those 6 years. Revised funding numbers, red is the decrease and green is an increase in requests. And then you'll see arrows on the screen indicating when funds may have been shifted around. As the priorities move, we do shift things. This, everything besides the budget year is meant to be able to be flexible. It is meant so that way we plan, we act accordingly, but certain needs will arise or come up in the interim. And so then we shift priorities to make sure that if there's a leaking roof, we fix that first before we take on something else. And then lastly, italicized projects are new. So you'll see those throughout. There's only 15 new projects this year. It's about average of what we have, but we are trying to make sure that the CIP is under control. And so sometimes there are fewer new projects depending on what our ask of the departments is. So moving into the numbers, total funds adopted CIP versus proposed CIP. This also follows along with your presentations once we get into the departments and then the first couple pages. But you'll see here that we have a approximately $28 million reduction from the prior year. That is still a total of $561 million. That is in line with past CIPs. And in here you can see that it fluctuates from year to year, but the red bars and blue bars that are close together demonstrate that they are within pretty close of what we planned last year. So anything out of the ordinary where there's one blue bar or red bar that is high above the other means that a change happened that year. So I know this is too small for you to see. I can't see it from here either. But this is just showing the specific numbers of what's going on. So what we can see here is it's a 5% reduction from prior years overall. As I mentioned, $28 million. Last year's CIP was approximately $589 million. We have different funding sources, and I'll get into the percentages of those next. So this is a fun little tree map that is showing what is going on. And I'll read off the lines because you can't see the details in the bottom there. The top left corner is the biggest box, which shows county funding, which is 36% of the overall total. Below that is county cash, operating cash at 14%. To your right are the two red squares. That's district funding. So the large square on the interior is 24%, and that's special district charges. District cash is 6% on the far right. Below that, in green, circling around, is the enterprise fees. And unfortunately, the caption is right on there, but it is split, and you'll see a very small piece. The top piece is 6%, and below that is 1%. To note, enterprise and district funds, those are generally from user fees. So either sewer systems, airport fees, Monroe Community Hospital. We'll get into those, but those represent essentially enterprise services where they bring in funding and then they use that funding to pay for their services. And those purple segments there are federal and state funding. So this is aid that comes into Monroe County. We apply for grants. We have programs through our Department of Transportation, through other services to help us facilitate roads, sewers, projects, things like that. Federal funding is approximately 8% of the 6-year schedule, and state funding is approximately 5%. In prior years, you'll see private in there. There is no private funding currently in this version of the CIP. That happens from time to time as a specific project comes up that a individual or entity is working on something that is related to Monroe County facilities and they donate funds. Often happens with municipalities on road projects and other things like that. So let's move to federal funding. So federal funding was a decrease of 2.29 million years. I'll note that this federal funding is an estimate. It's what we know as of right now. That may change. Of course, lots of things are changing in the world nowadays, so we expect to see some change, but nothing of note there. Like I said, it's a drop of $2.29 million, not a lot of change that we're aware of. That includes aviation, DOT, highway and bridges, and traffic engineering. Moving on to the next slide. Whoops, Ishan, can you help me out there? There we go. Total state funds. So MCC, aviation again, facilities, DOT, highways and bridges, and transportation engineering again, and then the sheriff's office. So this is an increase of $2.79 million, approximately $27.9 million over the 6-year program. You'll see some changes throughout there. I'll go into some specific details on those in those areas when we get to the projects specifically. Enterprise funds. So I mentioned, like I said, these are user fees that are coming in, Monroe Community Hospital, aviation, and solid waste. This is an increase of $2.3 million. And so we see there that is $38.9 million up from our prior year's total of $36.6 million. So slight increase, but really that is not something that is out of the ordinary and keeping pace with inflation and movement of funds. Moving on to total district funds. So this is primarily, or this is exclusively Pure Waters. So this is a decrease of about $34.65 million. We'll get into the specific details of that when we get to the Pure Waters portion. But you'll see this is a drop of $202 million to $167 million. And then lastly, total county funds. So this is, as I mentioned, county debt, taxes, and things like that. So this includes Board of Elections, the clerk's office, when they're in the CIP, they are not currently in this version. The information services, the medical examiner's office, Monroe Community College, the library, DES facilities, the parks, the zoo, highways and bridges, transportation engineering, public safety, and the sheriff's office. So this is an increase of $3.7 million. So it goes from $276.8 million in the 25-2030 version to $280.5 million in the 2026-2031 version. All right, so this is, I apologize. I was hoping we'd have a bigger screen, different room. This is incredibly hard to see, but what this shows you is the total funds by department. And so, once again, where you see a blue and a red line that is dramatically different indicates change. And so really the only substantial change that I've already mentioned is kind of right in the middle there, that spike, and then the drop off, and that's the Pure Water's $34.7 million difference. That top numbers up there that you can't see from here represent the change per department. We'll talk about each department, so there's no need to read those off right now, but we'll go into those, and of course, we can ask questions about that. Moving into the projected debt service. So our finance department in Monroe County, every year as we aggregate these numbers, they start to pull together information and understand what the impacts to the debt service would be. And so one thing that happens in almost every one of these graphs that is pretty typical is that the top portion, which is red, which is the debt added by the proposed CIP, in this case, once again, 2031, usually is higher in those out years. Because we are adding debt, and as we ideally choose to do so through the CIP program, we want new projects and new spending to happen in the outer years. So naturally, that is going to occur in that portion. And then you'll see the red kind of or the blue taper off. That's because we program the debt in the beginning, and then it kind of fluctuates down. And then the middle portion in there is the authorized but unissued debt. So that is debt that we anticipate taking on based on projects that are getting underway, but have not yet got underway or maybe used all of their funding. One thing to note, of course, is that trend line up top. You'll see that the overall debt starts to move up in the middle and then starts to curtail as well. One of the focuses that we've been working on is trying to make sure that far bar starts coming down even more and more as we move forward. Because of course, as we all know, debt costs us additional money. So we want to try to control that as much as possible. Moving into department slides. So once again, please jump in. I know this is often where the more questions occur because it's a bit more tangible to understand the specific projects. Information services, this is the county's IS or technology department, so to speak. It's a 9% reduction, which is about $1.8 million from the prior years. And one of the reductions that you see on the far left here from 2025 is the enterprise resource planning, which fell off in 2025 as we implement that. So that represents $1.5 million. The other changes are smaller changes that they've made throughout the program. Nothing specifically to note, and there are no new projects from information services this year. Board of Elections we'll move to. So this is 50% decrease, which is approximately $2 million. A bit of a misnomer. The project is falling off the books from it's a 2-year project. We are on the final year of it. So 2025 represents that first year. And that project is for voting equipment. And so you'll see here that we have scheduled in 2026, $2 million. And we have scheduled in the past CIP 2026, $2 million. So consistent with years past. No new projects for that as well. All right, Health Department, Medical Examiner. So this is a 7% reduction, which is approximately $90,000. One thing you'll note, the numbers differ between departments. Some have to spend a great deal more money to fulfill their mission. Others spend a lot less. So that's why we have both figures and the raw numbers for you, so you can kind of see and tell what's going on there. Mostly flat. The only real thing to note here is that you'll see that the toxicology lab equipment medical examiners moved their funding from 2028 to 2029. They're also aggregating those funds. They've noted to us that the cost of instruments has gone up, not surprisingly. So they are aggregating funds and making sure that they can continue to do the work they're doing, either by pushing a purchase out or making sure that they have the ability to do so at the right time. And no new projects for that department as well. So Monroe Community College. So they have a 20% increase, which is about $8.1 million from 2025 to 2030. So you'll see here a bunch of red bars that are greater than the blue. I'll show you that. So we have up in 2026, 2027, 2028, we have services for student renovations. We have approximately $5 million in 2026, 8.1 in 2027, 8.2 in 2028. Those are additions, which is a new funding stream for those projects. Things have changed a little bit. And then we have here 2030, we have the Campus Welcome Center, which is an additional $4.8 million in 2030. Overall, the increased funding is $8 million, so from 40 million to approximately 49 million. Let's see, I want to draw your attention to the new projects, of which they have, two. So it's on this last page here, the last two projects, which are coming at the end of the cycle, 2031. We have reorganized front drop-off. So this is part of their master plan currently. They are planning to upgrade some entrances, both to facilitate easier traffic flow patterns, not only for individuals, but also for people taking public transit to their facilities. They're also making sure that people don't get lost and confused. For any of you who have been to MCC, sometimes the entrances look identical, and so people don't know which one to go to when they need to get to their services. And of course, it does attract visitors and other people who use it for non-academic related purposes. So that's part of that. This is also a follow-up or related to the ATC project. There's going to be some new road development there, and so they'll be working on that along with some parking lots. Similar to that is the campus gateway improvements. So that will be upgrading entranceways, roads, parking lots, and also entrances to the buildings. Once again, if you've ever been to MCC, it's sometimes hard to know exactly where you need to go from the entrances, and so they're going to make it clearer for the user. That will include wayfinding and some other parts of their master plan that they adopted a few years ago. All right, Monroe Community Hospital. So no new projects here. It is a 15% reduction from prior years, which is approximately 2.6 million. Overall, their project, as I mentioned, dropped. So we previously had a total of 17 million. We're now at about 14.5 million. Pretty static. They are trying to make sure that the facility they have is maintained and operated. They have worked on some prior projects that were upgrades. Currently, these are all kind of maintenance, operating and maintenance projects.
How did they decrease it?
How did they decrease it?
Yeah.
Well, they had some luck last year, which they talked about right at the end of the CIP, which was some roadway lot repaving. They originally thought that was going to be a $2 million project, but it's now a $750 million project. And then trying to find. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
A little different.
A little different. I apologize. There's lots of numbers floating through my head, so
Yeah,
please
yeah.
correct me if my tongue goes quicker than my mind. And then, of course, just trying to find ways that they can save money.
Sure.
All departments were asked to try to save as much money as possible through this CIP cycle. We know that we don't want to have the CIP that grows too much. So that was a priority that we worked on. Moving to no new projects, so there's nothing to note there. And like I said, there's multiple adjustments to timing and funding, but overall a decrease. Library services. So this is another reduction, 2% reduction, 500 or 25,000. Apologies. I need to read my notes here because I can't read that far. You'll see there's a big spike in the middle there with the arrow. That is the fleet replacement project, was moved from 2028 to 2029. That was just the desire to move the project out. They think they can continue to use their vehicles for a little bit longer before they have to take on that next project. That is generally a reoccurring project. It comes up every, 5 or so years. For all of those who use the physical books at the library, we have the benefit of being able to return them to any library we want. And so that's what those vehicles are primarily doing. All right, and so there is I mentioned the arrow there, so that's the change from 2028 to 2029. Let's move on to aviation. So aviation also has 0 new projects in this cycle. They do have an increase of 10%, which is about $4.35 million. As I mentioned, they are largely an enterprise department and a grant-funded department. So it's a 30% reduction of enterprise and 21% increase in state and federal funds. Couple reasons for this. First of all, they have projects that, depending on the funding they get from the federal government, can move up, and the states can move up. They have to submit a plan to the state as to what they want to do. The state then selects what projects they think are priority and that they should accelerate. And so the airport often shifts their projects around based on what the state deems the most important and worth funding each year.
Yeah, quick question is actually about MCC, but this.
Yeah, we can go back.
Does tuition from MCC go into enterprise cash? Or how's that work?
So MCC is, Bob, can you answer that actually? I don't believe that's the case.
Tuition that students pay, that money resides with MCC, it does not come to Monroe County. So this would represent any cash capital contributions for MCC represents a contribution from the county of Monroe to MCC. It would be tax supported.
Okay, so none of the tuition supports the county budget, but the county budget supports MCC. Okay. Thank you.
With 50% of the capital project being paid by SUNY, the county.
By the state.
Yeah, by the state.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, so we were at aviation, we're just getting into it. Yep. Getting into aviation, we have a $11.5 million increase in 2027 that I just want to draw your attention to as that large spike. They moved a few projects around, access circulation roadway, terminal improvements, runway 28 safety improvements. Those were all either moved or increased in 2027. The total funding from prior years to this cycle is $43 million to approximately 47 or really $48 million. As I mentioned, 0 new projects to really point out. They have their funding ratio, as we mentioned, is a mix of state and local county dollars. DES Pure Waters. So this is a 17% decrease, which accounts for $34 million from prior years. So for those of you who have been on the board in prior years, there was a project in the CIP related to permit upgrades at the Frank E. Van Leer treatment plant. That project still needs to happen, but the total dollar value and time frame is unclear. And so therefore we're choosing to remove it so we can have a better idea of what it is. In terms of the actual funding schedule, we are currently working with county law and DES and New York State to figure out what the implications of that permit will be and what the schedule will be as well. So that $34 million will likely come back in some fashion in the future, but unfortunately we do not have enough information to feel confident with that right now. There are 5 new projects I want to draw your attention to. So we have one in the early years, and I believe that the planning board may have already seen this, but this is the Rochester Pure Waters District, Frank E. Van Leer, Water Resources Recovery Facility, Biosolids Handling. There is a need for some equipment to be replaced there. It's a $2 million expense slotted into 2026. Essentially some industrial programmable logic controllers, which is a fancy word for something that automates a complex system, needs to be replaced, and it is the whole system and the controller is quite expensive at $2 million. And then also we have $1 million for in 2031 for that same project, so a total of $3 million there. Going to the second page here, we have the Northwest Quadrant Pure Waters District, Waste and Water Resources Recovery Facility, secondary clarifiers. So this is really just replacing mechanical and electrical components in that facility. It's in the out year of 2031, $1 million. Nothing specifically to note other than just really operation maintenance needs there. Northwest Quadrant again, this is some security upgrades, and the same thing actually for the Frank E. Van Leer. There is $100,000 for the Northwest Quadrant and $250,000 for the Frank E. Van Leer. Just increasing security at both of those facilities, and we are working with both public safety and the sheriff's office to implement those. As we all know, sometimes government facilities can be targets, and so we need to make sure that those are safe, people are kept out of them, and that they can continue to carry on their mission, so that way we can all flush our toilets and not worry about it. Last new program is the Frank E. Van Leer Waste and Water Resource Recovery Facilities holding tanks cover replacement. These are replacing sludge holding tank covers, $1 million in 2031. Clearly, we want to keep the sludge inside the tanks, and so those are end of life, and so we're working on replacing them. All right, so we can move on to DES Facilities and Engineering. So this is a 12% reduction, approximately $8 million or just under $9 million really from 2025 to 2030. Specifically, I want to point to 2026 where we have a $6.5 million increase. So there's a new project being slated in the early year there, Ames Building Expansion. For those of you who are aware, that is where the medical examiner's office is. There's additional need at that facility and capacity to continue their work. So that is something that is being scheduled sooner rather than later. And then lastly, minor improvement, the Hall of Justice courtroom improvements. That is a $500,000 project. that is being advanced from, 2028 to, 2026. We have a couple other schedule shifts in here, that are worth noting, but not a dramatic change to the overall program. So you'll see that public safety, utility, operations, communication, fiber optic improvements, phase 3, that top right arrow going a couple or 3 years over, shifting some funds, moving it from one year to the other, and pushing some numbers back to 2031. We have a new project. There's one new project in this program, and that is the GIS Enterprise Systems Improvements. So these are some upgrades to the county's GIS components and equipment that we use specifically with LiDAR. And so that is slotted into 2027 and moving also into 2031. We have a shift in on the second page, middle of the second page, moving to your right from 2028 to 2031. Westfall building reconstruction. So we have moved some of the dollars from 2028 into 2031. That is a project that we are still entertaining, but we want to move out to make sure that we have a full understanding of what that project will be. The need is there, but not immediate. All right, so we can move on to the DES solid waste program. So this is a $6.93 million increase from prior years. 2025 to 2030. Specifically, you'll see the spike there in 2026, $5.4 million increase. That is related to the Northeast Quadrant landfill improvements. Some of you may be familiar with it, known as Gloria Drive. So that is a project that we have been working on. We are aggregating the dollars and moving it into 2026 so we can get it underway. And then there's a new project just below that under solid waste heavy equipment. That is a replacement of some heavy equipment at the solid waste division, replacement of the tub grinder. Essentially, there are things that they need to throw in and grind up into smaller pieces. And then a front end loader that helps them move things around at that facility. So that is $1.5 million in 2026. Yep, go ahead, Sam.
Question, so the Northeast Quadrant, Glory Drive landfill monitoring improvements?
Mhm.
$9 million?
Right, that's for the cover, to replace the cover that's on the landfill right now.
What's the expected life of that?
It will be designed for 30 years or so.
30 years, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I think that's everything. Yeah, that is everything with solid waste. So let's move on to parks. So this is just under $1 million decrease from the prior years, which represents about 8%. You'll see their bars are relatively static. They found ways to reduce across the board in many places. And if we go to these next slides, you'll see, lots of color, green and red, indicating that numbers have changed, either moving up or moving down. The only new project that I want to draw to your attention is at the very end, slotted for 2031, which is Elliston Park improvements. Many of us probably are familiar that on rainy days like we had yesterday, the shelters there are underwater. Although that might be a feature to some people, that is a problem. And so we're looking at potentially designing some solutions that could reduce that and also make it so that there's less labor involved in cleaning that up. But that really is the biggest issue. It's okay, that's a flood zone, that happens. However, there's significant labor when that needs to be cleaned up because there's silt and sediment that essentially covers the concrete, the wood, and all those things, which also could potentially impact the life of those facilities. Go ahead.
Could you go back? a
Yeah,
slide?
absolutely.
Or just what's the reduction?
Overall,
Yeah.
996,000,
Percentage.
8%.
Thank you. Good.
And please feel free to stop me and ask questions. Okay, so we covered Elephant Park. Let's move on to Parks, Seneca Park Zoo. So we have a $600,000 reduction, which is a reduction of 20% from 2025 to 2030, dropping from about 3 million to 2.74 million. There are no new projects in the Seneca Park Zoo category. They move some numbers around, but other than that, every project is still existing. There are some changes to their overall structure. Some projects growing in years, some projects reducing in years. And as I said, the overall is a reduction of $600,000. Right, moving to DOT highways and bridges. So this is a $3.5 million reduction, or about 4% from 2025 to 2030. I'd like to draw to your attention that red spike in year 2027. That is a $12.1 million increase in 2027. That represents $5 million of federal funding, $5 million of county funding, and $954,000 in state funding. As I mentioned, a lot of the aid that comes into, or some of the aid that comes into Monroe County is related to DOT highway and bridges. That project was advanced to 2027 due to that aid arriving and DOT having capacity to implement the project. They have 0 new projects overall. They are working on moving some things out for the prior years, and that's what represents the 2031 year, but nothing new as of right now. They did make a change in the very end here, getting into the last page, 5 Mile Line Road in Penfield. They've moved that project from 2030 to 2031. And then just to summarize, that is a overall drop from $80.77 million to $77.21 million over the course of their 6-year program. DOT traffic engineering. So this is a $1.6 million decrease, which is about 10% of the overall 6-year program. We have a reduction in 2026 of $2.7 million. And this is specifically related to a project that's actually advancing to the 2025 year. So it has been removed from this CIP and actually will be offered to this board very shortly for referral and review. That is the traffic signal and systems replacement group 1. If you're looking at your old book, that is replacement of 7 locations where they will be replacing the overhead wires that control the stoplights or the traffic lights and the pedestrian signals on the side with modern mast arms like you see out front here, new audible signals so that way people can hit the button and hear what's going on. And those are primarily, so multiple intersections, but the roads that are common are Dewey and Ridgeway up in Greece. Otherwise, no new projects to the traffic engineering program. And to summarize again, that is a prior cycle, $16.8 million, moving to $15.17 million. All right, public safety. So we have an increase in public safety of $18 million. This represents about 66% from the prior year. That largely accounts for new funding in 2031 and new funding and additional funding in 2030, which both represent increases of about $8 million for the public safety communications radio replacement. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So that is a new project that is being slated into the cycle in the out years. And so that the county has a unique system compared to some other counties. We maintain a common radio system for first responders and public safety workers. That allows interconnection across departments. It allows safety in terms of if one radio goes down, there's another one that can come back up. Jurisdictions can speak across lines and across disciplines, but we supply them with portable radios and mobile radios for vehicles. Those need to be replaced every now and then, and that's what this is designed to do, is to start that replacement in those years. Approximately a 10-year lifespan, but as we all know with technology, they tell us 10 years and it always seems to go quicker than that. So we're hopeful for 10 years, but we are aware that we will reevaluate as we move forward. And I know, like other departments, they do the best to try to keep all of the equipment up and running as long as possible because these costs are not insignificant to departments in the county. All right, let's move on to Office of the Sheriff. So this is a $8.7 million reduction from 2025 to 2030. We have the large bar on the left there represents some 2025 work, which is design and engineering work for renovations at the jail. And then we have 2 new projects also related to the jail. Jail Tower General Building, I'll slide over. Jail Tower General Building envelope and site improvements. That's some structural, physical changes that need to happen within. And then Jail Tower HVAC and MEP improvements. So those are the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing needs that need to happen within the building as well. So those are routine operating and maintenance that needs to happen over time on these facilities. And so those are being scheduled for 2026 to 2028. And then there is one other new project not related to that. which is the sheriff's special team equipment vehicle replacement. So this is for the a command incident vehicle that is used when they have to when we have large events and they need to make sure they have a presence on site to respond to something that may happen, that has lots of equipment to monitor and be able to have essentially a mobile office at these locations. So that is being slated in for 2031. And then lastly, I will show you the Monroe County Waters Authority informational purposes only. We include this in our CIP for bonding purposes, but we do not control the Monroe County Waters Authority. They have their own board and own decision making. But you can see here that they have a relatively flat program coming in. It does rise by about $2 million or a little over $3 million. And so no new projects they've noted, just routine continuing operating and maintenance over the next 6 years they have programmed into their progress. So with that, I just want to remind everyone about the schedule from here on out, and then we can go back to discussion about departments that we want to talk about. So our next meeting, your next meeting is Thursday, March 13th here at 3 p.m. again. We will have ideally a public hearing on the proposed CIP. Public will be invited to attend. We will have department CIP presentations as warranted, as needed or requested, I should say. We will make sure that you have opened the priority voting at that point. So we want to make sure that you have the ability to do that. We can open it up this week, but we generally don't open it up till next week. And then the following week, Thursday, March 20th, we have another meeting, same place, same time. More presentations if needed. Often we split up departments for their convenience, and so that way you have a shorter meeting. We will also ideally entertain a vote on the CIP for recommendation to the county executive and then the county legislature. And then we will discuss the budget year priorities. In other counties, this has been referred to as the sniff test. You guys all vote, there's waiting, it comes up with a list. Does that seem right to you? So we'll evaluate that together, make sure that everyone feels comfortable. And then if necessary, we will meet March 27th for the CIP. You may have a regular meeting. That is something that Ishan will let you know about. And then your mission at this point is to help me identify who from the departments we should invite in. If something piqued your interest, you have questions on, please let us know. We will work with those departments to get them here in the next 2 weeks. So with that, I will be done talking and turn the floor over to everyone else.
Great. Any more questions for Patrick? Thank you, Patrick. Nice job. Any questions? Just from a general sense? Yeah.
If we want a department to ask them questions, do we email you or do you need to know like today?
So if you have an idea now, please tell us.
Sheriff,
Okay. And if you have other ideas before then, you can communicate those with Ishan before that.
I would say DOT too,
So Sheriff,
and the transportation.
Are there specific points for either that we can make them aware of so they can be better
I think for
prepared?
the sheriff, I'm interested in the body worn cameras and any other surveillance technology. And then the DOT, I ask every year. I mean, I'm just very interested in infrastructure like sidewalks, bicycles, bike lanes, and where that fits in.
pedestrian and
Yeah,
bicycle safety, right,
that kind of stuff.
Right.
yes.
which there's been movement on with the.
Yeah, they're
CCC,
doing,
yeah.
and they're doing great. Lot of progress.
Okay. What else? Anyone?
There was yeah, great ideas, thank you. There was a large project in public safety, was that in 26?
Public
Was that the
safety.
radio project, was that 26 or was that, did we have time in that?
Let me take a look.
Later on, I think it was.
It was later on,
The radio project is 2030 and 2031.
oh, okay,
So
No need to-
let's see, 26.
unless you want to hear about it, they probably don't know about it, what they're doing yet, so,
Is it, yeah, public safety, this one.
right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Kind of getting there.
You got all, it's like a cloud of a vision, you have a vision, but that's it, okay. Are there any large projects in like 26 that people have questions on that you think we should ask about? Do you think, or you're like,
I'm good.
you're good, yeah.
We've been going through this in September.
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
But I mean, please, if there's
Yeah.
anything that caught your eye.
no, the other comment I noticed, the reason I was asking, where did the decrease or increase come from? It just seemed like maybe money became available in 25 and they said, hey, let's move this up, and then our, our future projects didn't change much. That was a common theme throughout most of these. Or we shifted the checkers around, we moved this one to this year and that later on, so that the number, I noticed the numbers going up later. So is that, do you agree with that or no? Was there actually MCH, you said one project came in well under budget, so that was, they accrued some savings there.
Right.
So that was
Yeah, the site
very
paperwork.
good. Yeah, that was excellent. So, do we see that coming again anywhere?
I mean, I think that ideally, if this is working as it should,
Yeah.
larger numbers should appear towards the end of the cycle.
Yeah.
Because the goal is that we identify something far
Early.
enough out
Yeah,
that it is
Yeah.
in the out years.
Yeah.
And then it slowly moves up and that number gets sharpened and refined as we
Right.
move through the process.
okay, good.
So there are times where that doesn't happen. There are needs that arise suddenly. And so then something gets slated into an early year. And so that does happen, and that is evident in this program as well. That happens in every program.
Yeah, no, I mean, it seems like it's working and it worked. Having a plan seemed to help us out and we were able to find those savings, which is nice. So my second question was, on the debt, there's usually, it's a 7% max or something that you're allowed based on your valuations, right?
Well, property,
County
yeah.
valuations, right?
Bob,
Something
can you
like
answer that?
So, but how are we doing with, my question is, how are we stacked up with other counties? Are we on par? Are we a little bit more, a little bit less? Do you have a feeling for that or?
I only tend to look at the large counties.
Yeah.
So I can't make any comments statewide.
Yeah, and you just want to be like equal type of counties, similar counties, yeah.
Try to be better.
Try to be better, yeah.
If you look back over time, debt service in Monroe County, the cost of debt service compared to our operating budget has been 5%, 6%.
Yeah.
Maybe 7,
Yeah,
probably 4, 5, 6% of our operating budget.
Yeah.
The goal is to be under 10% for
Okay.
credit purposes and financial management purposes. We don't really look at debt service in terms of full value, but outstanding bonded debt, we are about 0.7%. We try to be under 1%.
Yeah.
That's not a requirement.
right,
It's a sound practice.
okay. So we're well within standard operating, yeah, okay, great. What does that 7% rule mean with the state? Is that based on?
It's not really a state rule. It is, can I call it a rule of thumb? You see it a lot talked about at GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, state and national levels.
Okay.
It's just about keeping debt service within 10% of your operating budget.
Okay.
Because of the risk involved.
Right,
A municipality who defaults on their bonds, will be lucky to get investors to loan money
Sure.
again.
Yeah,
So it takes a tremendous hit on the county's credit rating. It is also a risk, maybe in other counties rather than Monroe, but if the Monroe County Legislature fails to appropriate sufficient dollars to pay our debt service, state law has me as finance director take the first money from our property tax collections and put that in an escrow account equal to our debt service. So failure of the legislature to appropriate sufficient funding puts the county in a bind because by law I have to take that money,
right,
even though it wasn't appropriated, and make that payment.
and make the payment to the debtors, yeah, sure, yeah, yep.
Chairman, are you referring to the state constitution debt limit? Is that the 7% there?
That's, yeah.
So that's
what it is.
referenced in page 1 here. And so the New York State Constitution has established a debt limit equal to 7% of the 5-year average full valuation of real property in the county.
Oh, real property,
Yeah.
and that's, oh, 5-year average, okay.
So we're roughly at 15% of our constitutional debt limit.
We're at roughly 15% of that
15, yep.
of that 7%, so, oh,
So
Yeah.
it's a headache for cities
yeah,
across the
Sure.
state. Rochester is probably closer to 90, if not more.
okay,
It's a bigger headache for
I
cities.
see. Yeah, so real property value, if that goes up and you're able to borrow more,
Right.
By from a state standpoint, but if your values drop, you get in trouble. Yeah, okay. Good. Any other questions from
Yes,
anybody?
on the county water, Plymouth County Water Authority.
Mhm.
They're fully self-funded from fees, the way it looks here.
That is
For
correct.
capital
They're an enterprise fund as well. So all their funding comes through, payments for water.
Is it always like that? Was there ever I don't recall ever seeing.
Bob, can you?
The water authority, was created, somebody else helped me out here.
73 or
19,
something?
yeah,
Yeah.
wasn't it the seventies?
It was the
Yeah,
70s, yeah.
Yeah,
They are their own authority, their own tax ID number, their own legal entity. Their debt is not county debt. There's no county legal or moral obligation behind authority debt. The only caveat is we include them in the CIP because if they issue debt, it requires the legislature to concur.
But not back it?
That is correct.
Okay.
It is not debt backed by the full faith and credit of Monroe County.
last time they presented, they,
Water authority?
yeah, they had, well, we had approved the new plant out on the east side. And I think they mentioned it was designed for almost 70% of the whole county. So we had, you know, Shoremont that could handle 100%, but then, you know, and I think they were operating at like 15 to 25%, somewhere around. I don't know what the numbers are, but is there somewhere we can get an update?
Yeah, we can reach out.
Yeah.
I mean,
We don't need to have them come
Okay,
in.
yeah.
I just, you know, just, hey, how's everything, you know, percentage wise I'm thinking from a planning standpoint for county citizens, you know, how are we doing with water supply? Are we good? I also saw an article on chemical contaminants in waters that were, you know, and each of the water authorities throughout the state had, but I didn't see Monroe in there. I was wondering if they weren't on the list because they didn't have any, which would have been good, but I kind of doubt that. So I was just wondering if that, you know, if there was something that they have a report, maybe it's on their website.
we will research that and ask them questions as needed and then present it at the next meeting.
Oh, great.
Pat, on the water authority, the other question that would be good to know, what percentage of the water that they're treating is going to our neighboring counties? Because I know we supply to some to Livingston and a bunch to Genesee County, I believe. Just interesting how much of our capacity is going to our neighboring counties.
Absolutely, we'll do.
The other thing, Pat, you have this presentation in paper, right?
Yes, we can.
Could you drop one off at my ledge office so I can pick it up when I'm in the office tomorrow?
Would the board like copies?
Well, is he asking for the presentation or is copy of the CIP?
You're-
A copy of the CIP, not the presentation.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, we will send one out tomorrow.
Thank you.
The presentation, you'll have a digital copy, I take it. Send out, so, okay.
Love your slideshows.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Anything else? Anybody looking around the room? Any questions? Sam, any more?
Last comment,
Yeah,
as you and the members go through the details, you'll get to the pages that describe each project. There's a little box at the bottom, estimated annual impact on the operating budget. We have to go through each one of these and update them, okay?
So they're not accurate, is that,
That is right.
okay.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
we'll get you
We'll
those.
get you an amendment or an addendum that we can give to you to summarize everything.
I see. Yep. Yeah, I mean, they're all zero, so yeah,
And of course, we'll make sure it's correct for the next sprint.
gotcha. Okay. Anything else? Any comments or questions?
Maybe one comment, Bill, and Pat, as always, really thorough presentation, so thank you for all the work you do, and the way you're able to lay it all out for this board is very helpful. Maybe just a general question, so I just was like finding all the books that I have from prior years, and I was just aggregating the 6-year total. And I think, as you noted, this year's CIP is proposed to be about 5% smaller than last year's CIP. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I'm just going back to like 2020, and like it goes up one year and then down the next, and up one year and then down the next, but generally the line is going up, and it's almost like a stock chart where it's appreciating over time, but it kind of has fluctuations up and down. And I just was curious for your or anyone else's comments on kind of just the broad, when you think beyond this year's CIP and think in the years ahead, will that kind of trend that I'm seeing continue where it goes up, it goes down, but over time it's going up probably 5 to 7% year over year? Or is there a broader long-term strategy on the county's part to kind of shrink the program, and this is just the first year?
So you'll note in, I think it's the first or second page of the proposed summary that there is a statement about the current priorities and keeping debt down and things like that. And so we did make a concerted effort to bring down this year's CIP and make it apparent to departments that we hope to continue to do so in future years. With that being said, it is still more expensive now than it was 30 years ago to do anything. And so I anticipate that regardless of how much we control the CIP and keep it in a reasonable limit of our spending power, those numbers will go up. I have looked at the numbers based on, inflationary numbers, and we are in many ways still spending about the same that we did many, many years ago. So although the raw numbers appear greater, that is true of many things that we buy in the grocery store. And so that is a part of the way the numbers work. But we have, to your point, we have at least back to the mid 2000s, the numbers, so we can understand how it's going. And you're absolutely right. It goes up and down, with a slight trend upward. But we are trying to make sure that trend stays as small as possible in the coming years.
And if I heard you correctly, you would assert that even though it's going up modestly over time, it's almost benchmarked with general inflation rates.
Almost would be appropriate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, of course.
Is it possible to get a chart that shows inflation and in line with our costs? Because that might,
Yeah.
I don't know about everybody else, but a lot of times the numbers look really large.
Yep.
And seeing them trend up is concerning. But maybe if we saw the inflation line on that same chart, it would be more apparent to us if we're spending above or below inflation.
Absolutely.
Which might add to peace of mind, I don't know, or maybe not.
Yeah.
More
It may go the other way, who knows?
Yeah,
That
that helped when I was on one of the boards, sorry, it was a school board, and they added that inflate those CIP, the cost indexes.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually, it did help resolve some anxiety, right? There were things that caused other costs to go up, and those were specific, maybe personnel issues or whatever, negotiations, but yeah, if there's a project, yeah, you're right. I think having that inflation number on just comparison, it'd be, that's a good chart. Thank you. Comments?
Of course.
Any other comments?
Pat, I missed the slide maybe, but is our cash capital number, or is that charting flat, or has that been going up too over the last few years? as a percentage versus, what we bond for. Oh, I think
Oh, yeah, that works for his purposes, Yushin. So Legislator Colby and Mike, you're probably the only people who can actually read this, in the room at least. But so
Trying.
that, so that does show the county's cash capital. And it fluctuates as well, but it is trying to stay at a pretty reasonable number in terms of year to year. It ranges from about 53 million to 41 million. Give or take, so it fluctuates, but it is within a ballpark.
The cash is flat, basically, yeah.
For the most part, we do have and one of the other things noted in the summary is that a goal to spend as much money or use cash capital to fund many of the projects and smaller projects that we can afford to reduce our borrowing.
This is probably a dumb question for Mr. Franklin, but if you were to add the cash capital and the debt service, that's pretty much what you're spending out of the $1.3 billion budget a year on capital projects.
Yes, I would add in, because I do this for the state, we have asset equipment purchases that are identified in the budget book that could otherwise be put through a capital fund. So I generally add those as well.
So it's about 100 million a year. I think it was like 95 this year.
Debt service runs $90 million a year across the county. Cash capital is another, whatever that is.
Okay,
12,
got it.
13.
So I'm lowballing. Okay.
And probably a couple million in asset purchases.
Legislator, you might be referring to the yearly spending for the total CIP, which is about.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Yes.
Where does the cash come from? Is it left over from the budget or
We tax for it.
tax for it? So you're maintaining that level, so it's really not increasing, but you are using it for projects?
We use it for projects. It can only be used for project once it is transferred to that capital fund. It is relatively flat from last year. It has been in the past 3, 4, 5 years.
Is it on hand just for emergency or what's the?
Oh, no, it's a real project. It's not a rainy day fund. It is, generally speaking, those capital projects that a department proposes in the CIP that is annually recurring for roughly the same dollar amount year after year. It is also for county IS projects, which the way technology changes so rapidly, I would rather pay cash than a 5-year bond when it's obsolete in 3 years.
Yeah.
So you may remember my presentation last time, right? We have district cash we use for things if we have to repair sewers or add pumps in an individual pump. Or if we have a discrete project like the South Central Interceptor I was talking about, that would be bonded as a separate bonded project. The other ones are done under cash.
Anything $100,000 is the marker, I think, or the limit, right?
If
Something like
there's
that.
if there's a small project
Yeah.
that's gonna cost 100,000 or less, I
Yeah.
prefer to pay cash.
Right,
Sean is referring to the general collection improvement project.
Right.
yeah.
Which in the Rochester district is,
Yeah.
help me, is like 2.5 million, Sean.
Yes.
In a small district like GCO is more like 450,
400,000, yeah.
350.
Yeah.
Nice presentation.
Thank you. And I want to thank finance. They put the numbers together. They make sure that everything's right before we come to you with these. So it is a team effort to make sure that this is a product that we can be proud of.
So if my notes are right, we've got possibly the sheriff and DOT.
Correct, yeah. So we'll reach out to them immediately, see if they are available for either of these next 2 meetings. We'll give them a little information on why we requested them to come.
Okay.
And I'll also reach out to MC or the Monroe County Water Authority with some questions and see if they
Right.
can give us notes that I can read off.
Yeah, questions for MCWA and also the charge inflation versus.
Can you add the
CIP.
jail to the sheriff's?
I mean, they'll be available to speak.
Yeah,
about
I
everything,
figured, but
yeah.
you wanted to. heads up, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you had specific questions, and then pass them along and
Yeah.
that would
I can
be,
email, yeah.
that way, they're not, you're getting
I
answers.
think my questions are easy, but yes, I can do
Yeah.
that.
Okay. Any other questions or departments that we want to see? If not, we'll move on to setting a public hearing on the proposed 2026 through 2031 CIP for March 13th, 2025 at 3 p.m. And I need a motion for that, please.
I'll do it.
Thank you, Sean. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Andrew. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Thank you. Good of it. Any other business? Well, our next meeting is, as we just mentioned, the public hearing at March 13th, and then we will have, we will leave that open for comments until, the 20th. But that hearing will be, the public portion will be closed at that, and then we'll have our meeting. And then the 20th is, another meeting at 3 p.m. And then, hopefully we're all set. The vote's there. We need a motion for adjournment. Thank you, Robert. Is there a second? Thank you, Sam. All in favor?
Right.
Aye.